Hello everyone, my name is Elijah and my presentation I will be presenting on is a Raspberry Pi Ring doorbell. So let's first approach the problem that I faced. So I work in my garage and every time when someone rings the doorbell, I always have to get up and walk to the door and see who's there. Of course, which is wasted time. So the problems are of course walking those 15 feet, wasted time. Interrupting precious CS220 homework, more wasted time. And open the door just to see a package that isn't yours, wasted time. So now we know what the problem is. Let's see what solution that we can do. The solution that I had was making an automated doorbell that alerts you when someone's at your front door, which prevents me having to walk up and see who's there, and being able to see who's there before I open it, and having the option to unlock and lock the door from a click of a button. And to achieve that task, the parts that we'll need are only about 4 different parts. The first part is a Pi camera module, as you can see in the top right. And this I found on Amazon, which was about $15, and it was very easy to input into the Raspberry Pi. There's a little camera port, and all you would have to do is unlock that port and then plug in these ribbons to the end of it, and that will allow you to have access to the camera. The next is, of course, is a Raspberry Pi, and then these two are optional. The first one is a camera case, which I got, and that just encloses everything and makes it neat. And the next is a servo motor, and this allows a rotation of the lock, and all you would have to do is hook up a lock to it, and then that would unlock and lock it from some lines of code. Actually, pretty simple. Now, the software that was needed to make this doorbell is first the Raspberry Pi OS, and that was pretty simple to download. Raspberry Pi, their website had a really nice walkthrough, and this allows us to search the web and get a IP address for a Raspberry Pi, and which allows us to proceed in our coding. And next was we needed a server to host the live video stream, and for this one they used Flask server, which is written in Python. And we'll go a little bit more in depth what Flask is. A little quick outline of what Flask really is that it is a framework which allows us to host a server. So for our case, we need a server to host the video content of the Raspberry Pi. And what it basically does on a dumbed down level is that you have these different ports, different routes. This first route, and these are the different things that the user can enter in the search engine. So for our case, we have the IP address for our Raspberry Pi we get from the operating system, and a port that we have, port 5000. And whenever we go there, we send it to this root route, which is just a slash. And this is a default route that we'll go to. And we can add more routes. We can do slash something else, slash anything else. But for this case, all we're doing is returning a HTML file called index. And we can return anything here, but in our case, we're returning an HTML file, which allows us to present different buttons, a navigation bar, and since it's a file, we can present anything, which will allow us to import those two different buttons, unlock and lock buttons. So talking about lock, adding the locking mechanism was pretty simple. All we had to do was plug in the servo motor into the Raspberry Pi pinheads, and that allows us to have access to the motor. And within the Flask server, we will just add different commands to rotate the motor. And within the HTML file, we will add 2 new buttons, and on those buttons we'll have an on-click event, and those on-click events will just send a post request to this Flask server, and as you can see, these are 2 different routes, a lock and an unlock. And instead of sending back a HTML file, we're sending back logic to turn the motor different degrees. And we're just printing a lock and unlock to the console for the programmer to see what's happening. And this logic right here, all this does is just rotates the motor at different degrees. So if it's hooked onto once we click the button, let's say the lock button, it will rotate it some amount of degrees to lock the door, which is kind of interesting. if you really dig into the Flask server framework. So this is the HTML file that we're returning. And if you don't know HTML, this may seem a little crazy, but all this basically are, as you can see down here, these are two different buttons. We have a button right here. This will be the, I think this button is actually the lock button, as you can see. And then this is a unlock button. And up here we have the button to turn the camera off and on, as you can see back here. This is right here. Oops, my bad. This button right here, that off button and on button, that is going to be right here. And these are just different navigation bars, and yeah, and this is an image of the button that we're using. So these are different functions. You know, as I mentioned before, we have on-click events. So whenever we click this button back here, the unlock button, it will send these on-click events, and all this does is sends that information to this Flask server to do those rotation and the motors. And then right down here we have another on-click event, and all this is a built-in function. So we're making a variable called button, and we're getting the document.getElementById to button. And as we can see back in the HTML file, our red button right here, the ID is called button. So what we're doing is making this into a variable. And down here we're changing the CSS. The CSS is just the styling of that button and the logic. So we're changing the display of the whole screen to off, to none. And what that allows us to do is, whenever you click it, this unclick event happens and it will shut down the whole camera, and then once it's on, it will display it. As you can see, it will set display to none, and then once this navigation bar moves, it will set the display to block, which just presents a display to the screen. So the next step is adding face recognition to the camera. So as you can see down here, these are two extra buttons. This is a lock button and lock button, unlock button, and turn off and turn on. So all we had to do for the face recognition is there's actually a library that handles all the logic. So I do not understand the full logic behind it, but all we had to do was download a file and plug that into our folder, and that will tell the Flask server, or that will tell one of those files logic to detect the face and put a square around that. This allows us to have information. So later on we'll have information about this face. It will either be broken down little pixels, or it will tell us information about this face. But also there's different libraries. So this library control the face. We can have one that controls the whole body, or one that just controls the lower half of the body, or just the eyes. So there's a lot of potential with this. But for this one, we're just using a face one. So the future additions I would actually want to implement into this project are a couple. So first, since we're having that data from the face recognition, it would be interesting to add a database with different faces to automatically lock or unlock the face if it's crossed with one of those faces in the database. For an example, if I'm having the door locked, if someone in my family comes to the door, I would want the door to automatically unlock. So it will just run through the database and look for all those photos, and if it matches one, unlock it. If not, keep the lock. The second one is automatically turning on the camera once someone passes it. As of right now, we would have to go into the command line and run the folder for the camera to turn on. But it would be interesting to see how we would implement, if someone walks past it, it will automatically turn on, or if a button gets pressed, we can automatically run the Flask server to turn the camera on. And another addition I would like to add is to send notifications to your phone, email, or anything else once the camera is triggered. And that can easily be done through some libraries out there, which hooks up to your email or phone, and will just send notifications once those routes are seen in those Flask servers. And these are the resources I got it from GitHub. This has all the code, and this is from Makezine. It was really nice website. I walked through it, very simple and very easy to follow along. And that is all. Thank you.